In this video, I'm going to show you how to use the gradient tool. Now, the gradient tool gives a gradient to shapes that already exist. Note that if I click on the gradient tool and I try to click around and just create it, it's not going to. It's not like Photoshop because we can kind of see that we can work outside of the canvas and inside of the canvas. So the gradient tool needs to know where it's going to be. So if I want to set down a gradient, what I need to first do is to define the shape that I want the gradient to exist in. Now note, right now this has a red fill, and my outline, we'll make it a nice dark red, and I'm going to kind of thicken up the outline. Now the gradient tool looks like a gradient, and it has, and it's keyed to quick button G. When I select a shape, I can select over to the gradient tool and then click onto that shape. Now it should normally add it, but sometimes it needs just a little bit of coaxing. So some things that you can do is down in the stroke and fill, instead of choosing a particular color, I can come over here, and instead of choosing the non-fill, I can choose gradient, and that'll start to add a gradient to it. Then, with the gradient tool activated, I can click and drag within that shape to adjust the gradient. Now, I can change where the colors are. I can also double click onto the color and change what colors exist, and I can change how opaque those colors are, adding in transparency. So maybe I want to give this like 10% that side, and I want it to change into like a dark red on this side, and it'll be at 75%. So you can notice that I've added this gradient, and I can restructure that gradient, kind of like it coming from this side. And I can even structure how far that transition is. Over in the gradient palette, we can kind of see that many of these same things exist, that it tells it the angle that we put it at. It has the different sliders, and I can move those around. I can also click to add in extra sliders and change those colors individually. Like if I want a pinkness to happen, and I want that at, you know what, let's have this at 40%. And we can see that there's this little 40% gradient in the center of this. And that if I change, I'm going to create another shape behind this. And this one, I'm just going to ask it to have a solid color. We're going to send it to the back, and we're going to change its color to green. And you can see how my transparencies are working on there. Now, of the gradient, there is a couple other possibilities in the gradient tool. Right now I have it on linear gradient, but I can add a radial gradient, and I'll have to be on the gradient tool to be able to change facets about that. But I can have it come out from a side. I can move things around. If I decide that I don't want that pink one anymore, I can come over to the gradient slider over in the gradient palette, and I can delete that particular section. And if I want to have a more freeform approach to the gradient, I can click the freeform one, which allows me to move these around individually, change their strength, double click onto the individual points, and to adjust their colors. Because I could maybe make these, I don't know, a variety of different oranges. I'm going to make some yellows. I'm going to have a white. And this one in particular, I think I'm going to use the eyedropper to choose this gray over here. And each of those I can change the opacity, as well as when I have a point clicked on, I can delete that point, therefore readjusting the structure of the whole thing. Now, the fill isn't the only area where we can add a gradient. I can click onto the strokes, and I can ask that to also have a gradient, which you can see I kind of actually like how that looks, using those same linear properties of the very light low opacity red of 10% to the very dark 75% red. And that makes for a very unique design. So creating gradients can be very visually pleasing in Illustrator, but it's something that you want to use with care, especially if you want to create transitions in this in much of a painterly Photoshop sort of fashion. You have to start thinking about creating the shape first and then creating the gradients. So that is the gradient tool.